Thank you. Hi, everyone. Hello. Oh, it's such a nice, I hear back. That's great. Thank you for having me. What a pleasure to be here. And so far, what a great morning. I'll try to live up to it. So I'll start with what I actually do, because a lot of people say insight. What does that mean? In a nutshell, my job is to think. They pay me to think, and they pay me to essentially collect a lot of information and try to distill that into what is happening and how can we adapt and what should we be doing differently. And I usually tell everyone if they ask me, so I'm going to tell you the things that I have been thinking about and the things that I see changing in the landscape, which really sort of gives us a basis for which we can develop a strategy to act in it. Everything that you guys will see is based on, number one, sort of the vast array of information that we have at Universal Music in terms of how our artists' music is being consumed across all different platforms globally. But we also have one of the biggest consumer research programs in the music industry and probably in the entertainment industry as well. We're talking to over 100,000 consumers across 20 markets on a regular basis. So we really take this seriously to understand what's actually happening in the market and how things are changing. And obviously we have, in my team, we have a lot of people that sort of understand social media and understand what's happening in culture. So hopefully that gives a little bit of a basis of where is all this coming from. So let's dive into it. So I'm going to talk about marketing, but I think it's important to put the lens of how do we break artists in this new environment. And this is not something you don't know. It's really hard. And I think we've heard that before, right? There are no shortcuts, and it takes time. The artists that we're breaking today, they have been in the game for a long time. So the overnight success, sometimes you can have like a viral moment, and that's literally sort of very viral, very quick. That's very different to building a career. And we are very committed to the career building business. And we follow culture as well, and sometimes culture is, fast culture, so we also appreciate that. But it takes time. So what are the ingredients for that? And I'll try to sort of distill, again, some of the things that I've been seeing in the market. The first thing is it takes a lot of content as well for you to get to a certain level. So I think in the past, there was this, idea that you would, spend a lot of time recording the album, putting it out there, and, getting a music video out, and that was the launch of, essentially the era or the project. I think those days are officially gone. A developing artist, someone that is trying to essentially connect with other people, needs to have a conversation with people. And a conversation with people means a lot of content. So if I go quiet for 2 months, you might not remember me. Because essentially you're talking to a lot of people at the same time. There is an abundance of content like we have never seen before. So this is an example of an artist that has been at it for a long period of time, essentially building its catalog. And by the time that you have something that flicks the switch, that connects in a big way, essentially all of the efforts that you have in bringing these consumers into, essentially listening to this artist, suddenly you don't discover just a song, you're discovering a song plus 10 other songs that have, been released long before. So suddenly you have a lot to consume at that point in time that your attention is focused at that thing. So suddenly you go from just, taking a little bite to actually taking a mouthful. And that has the network effect that we have heard before earlier this morning. So it's really important to have the bank of content ready for when the flicker switches, which means not just music, it means what is the story, the narrative, the audiovisual content that is going to essentially replenish. I love the song, but who is this artist? What do they stand for, and etc. So that is sort of essentially the wave. And we see this effect pretty much Billie Eilish, the same, like by the time the flicker switched, she had so much content that people could get into, and Sabrina Carpenter and so many others. The other point I wanted to make, and this has been coming up a lot today so far, is how it looks in Australia. And this is not meant to be a depressing slide, but this is the reality. And the streaming ecosystem has changed the geographic mix of essentially the streaming economy. So the geo mix is different. Fun fact, in 2013, Australia's market size was bigger than the entire Latin American business. And literally last year, Mexico surpassed Australia as in value terms, in terms of industry size. Glass is half full, guys, because this means that there's a lot of consumers for you guys to reach outside of your home. So I think the point about this is more of a global game, more than ever, is really sort of imperative. Don't look at your market, look at the market, the globe, consumers everywhere. The means of communication today are global. You can find an audience for whatever it is that you're trying to communicate. Honestly, if you go into social media, you'll find pretty much anything and more. So there is an audience for everything. It's literally a job of how do I find it, how do I nurture, and how do I get them to sort of work with me in essentially sharing what I have. I think the other point, and you know, this is again sort of just mentioning again something we heard earlier today. There has been a significant shift in the marketing model and how we communicate music creativity to audiences. I am old enough to come from a world where, you know, mass media was, you know, relevant and prevalent. So you would have a number of magazines, you would have a number of radio stations, you would have a number of TV stations that you would consume, and record shops, etc. And the means of communication were such that I was able to reach with one piece of content, let's call it a music video. With one piece of content, I can reach a global audience, and everybody's going to be looking at that one piece of content at that same time. It's like television for those that remember it. We're all watching it at the same time. That's not possible today, or virtually, or very difficult, with rare exceptions of pieces of content that actually manage to get a large amount of people looking at the same thing at one point in time. If we all open our Spotify or Apple or whatever streaming service we have, but let's use Spotify as an example. If we're all in this place right here, same city, same place, same time, if we all open our Spotify, we're all getting a different experience. My Spotify is giving something to me, which is different to what it's giving to you. So suddenly the idea that I can push something that everybody's going to watch or hear or see or listen to at the same time is just no longer there. These services offer personalization. That's the utility that we're subscribing to, amongst other things. But the utility is it's personalizing to me, which means I have no longer the ability to reach everybody at the same time with one piece of content. So we sort of migrate into the other side, which is how do I then reach people if I'm not controlling essentially the means, and the algorithm is suggesting things to me, but also I don't have, there is not a defining piece of content that I can point people to. So if I told you that a small proportion of an artist audience commands a significant proportion of their consumption or streams, suddenly the notion that I need to reach a lot of people to essentially develop an audience is no longer the case. I just need to find those people that are going to say, this is amazing, and I'm going to tell my friends. Who are those advocates? Who are those superfans? Who are those very dedicated audiences that will essentially help you create that network effect and communicate how great this is or articulate why we should be listening to that? So it's a little, you have to go around it, but that's essentially what we're trying to do. So the point is knowing the audience and targeting your effort specifically to not necessarily a large group of people. It starts small. That's really sort of the game. And then these people will then help you advocating for the artist, for the content, and that creates the network effect. How do I recruit these fans to actually do the job with us and be in the journey with us? So I'll talk a little bit about ways in which we have seen this working. The other point is in the social landscape, and I think sort of a different dynamic, but also pointing into a similar direction. It started with, social media so we could communicate with our friends and family, and then it became sort of, short form content started coming in, and new media and essentially creators getting into the game. And now we're seeing sort of the community platforms growing, the Discords and WhatsApp, essentially people coming together. And again, in an environment where you have an abundance of content, I want to talk to people or be connected to people that like the same stuff that I like, and hence the community effect. So how do I identify and nurture these communities that vibe around the same thing, the same topics, and they can essentially amplify the message that I'm trying to get to? Suddenly, the direct-to-fan strategy, and dare I say it's CRM, it sounds like very, very old, but it's that. Like, these old concepts of marketing actually being incredibly relevant in today's environment where it's very hard to gather everybody, but if I can get to 3 people that are then going to really get into what I'm saying and help me propel the message, suddenly I will get to the 100, and then the flicker switches, and then it becomes sort of culture. So that's kind of what we're trying to emulate. And Discover is also changing, and how we structure, like in the case of, for us as a music company, but how we think about it. The playlist ecosystem was incredibly, important, and getting into a playlist meant pretty much, do I have a chance or not? It's still relevant. Pandemic comes over, TikTok blows, through the roof, and everything seemed to be about, creators and viral moments and, what's happening right now. And that's, again, still very relevant, but what has become apparent is that neither playlists nor TikTok viral moments are defining in what we see artist development and development of long-term careers. And that's, again, the bread and butter of what we do. So how can we transcend the fads and essentially build long-term narratives, long-term relationships between fans and artists? And today, what we see, the artists that we see connecting with fans in that way, and fostering that type of relationship, these are artists that have really nurtured their brand. And again, we're repeating what we heard before. It's all coming together. It's nice when it happens. But how do you do that is really through multi-touch points. You have to be in a lot more places because the algorithm is not necessarily going to work for you. It can, but we can't rely on it. So how do we then create the opportunities for discovery? And I have to say that I agree that artist development today is possibly harder than it used to be because you have to do all this. And it's not new, some of these things. I mean, this has been around for a long time, but from the very, very early stages of an artist's career, we need to be activating all of this. So yes, it is about the music, and it needs to be great because you know what? You're competing with the Beatles. Think about that. Really, really, it's all of the music, you know, the touch of the finger, it has to be really good. So that's point number one. Then it's like storytelling. What is it all about? Why should I, you know, something that I say a lot is like, I can't love you if I don't know you. And that, you know, you're trying to develop a relationship with the audience. What is the story? Why should I care? What do we have in common? Iconography, like I see this actually very little in very, you know, emerging artists and how they think about it. Think about logos, think about the Rolling Stones. That tongue means so much more than the band. It stands for rebellion, it stands for so much more. Like how are we creating these signs that are universal? Well, that are universal and transcend language or, you know, anything like that. So really important. I won't go through all of these, but, you know, even the brand collaborations, like the authentic ones, like how can I interact with, you know, a brand that means something and that means something to me as an artist, and how does that connect to audiences? So you have to really activate so much more the amount of content, and it's not just more because more is better, it's more because more is needed. You have to articulate what it's all about and why should someone fall in love with this theme, this topic, this, you know, idea and this music. And we spend a lot of time trying to dissect, you know, the ingredients of building fandom. And I think, again, it's, you know, the catalog, like very quickly, it's sort of this notion frontline catalog. I struggle with it because it's, you know, if I'm hearing it for the first time, for me, it's new music. It doesn't matter when it was created. And for, I think, you know, young consumers today are very, you know, focused on, do I like it and does it fit? Not when was this done? The high cadence is very important, the direct to fan communication and the cross platform strategy. These are all pillars of what we see happening over and over. So what does that actually look like? And this is an example, I think, of a great example of one of our labels, Interscope, how they've essentially internalized that the fans are really sort of the army that are going to help propel this message, this music, this idea that is Olivia Rodrigo and what it means. And we're not just sort of building the traditional sort of the artist iconography, the merch, you're also marketing the fandom. You're also leaning in and going like, this is what it's like to be an Olivia Rodrigo fan. This is like, you want to come into this club, this is who we are, this is what we care about, this is how we communicate, these are the signs that we recognize. So all of that and creating the spaces, so the social channels, what are we going to dress when we go to the concert? Like all of these things which seems to be happening, and it will be happening over there, but how do I amplify it? And how do I understand it and essentially use it as a feedback loop for the creative process? CRM, I hate that term because it sounds old, but it's really content delivered directly to the fan. And we have been doing a lot, great innovation in there in terms of how do we, with the entrustment of that data, with the entrustment of, you know, the contacts that we get from fans saying, I want to hear more about this artist or this thing, like how do we create engaging ways in which to communicate and keep them engaged. And obviously there is also product, and again, it goes beyond the music, it's about meaning. So if I can express it in how I dress or the things that I have around my house or my bedroom, then these are the ways in which fandom is going to be essentially propelled. And it's upon us to essentially deliver a diversified experience to the fans, which means a lot of different types of drops, a lot of different types of products, and, you know, a very efficient way of getting that to the consumer. So I spoke a lot about fandom, and I'll spend a minute or two speaking about culture and how we're seeing sort of the role of culture in amplifying these artists and how we leverage it. And we have developed a way or a framework of understanding what is the social conversation, or what we call it, the subcultures within socials, where these conversations live and where content is being created. How do we understand that, and how can we leverage that? So looking at, you know, hashtags and particularly focusing on short form content, we can essentially tier like what are the types of topics that are, you know, universal and sort of travel and gather a lot of audience. And so people dancing and couples, like that's, you know, very universal, and there's a lot of conversation around that. But suddenly you go to witch talk, and that's, you know, a world of its own, and there is a look and feel, and there is essentially specific content that is created there. So our job is to understand what these channels are, and these are channels, if you think about it in a different way, and how do we make sure that our artists are represented in these channels. Content that is not necessarily created by us, but content that is created by the creators, the fans themselves, and then it gets propelled within the socials. And what it looks like in practice is we can break this down for different genres or specific artists, and you can start to understand where is this audience live, what do they talk about, like, you know, how do they express themselves, or specific songs even, like what are the songs that define this? And, you know, ABBA comes up a lot for girls going out on hen do's and whatnot, and, you know, you have a lot of, you know, surprising things that come up as well, but essentially we're trying to understand how is the fans, how are the audiences syncing the music to a theme or a music to a visual element. What does this look like in practice? Why is this relevant, Gabi? I'll give you the example, like Noah Khan, so one of our developing artists. The album concept was a tribute to New England, and it had a very specific look and feel. It had a vibe, and it had a specific type of visual, which, you know, Noah was, you know, essentially everything that we were communicating, and the pieces of content that were created sort of resonated around that. Then we started to look at how is this being understood and consumed by the fans or the audiences, and in which channels or which subcultures this was appearing. And we found that granola girls and cottagecore and like these were the van life these were the things that people were essentially using Noah's music to synchronize with their own content. So that gives us like, okay, so that's number one, a feedback loop, like this is how it's resonating, because it could be completely different, and sometimes it is very different to what the content that we are creating sort of has a look and feel, but actually the creations by the fans and the audience is completely different. That's a feedback loop for us. But in this case, this was essentially the lane, so how do we amplify it? And then, you know, there is a piece of work that goes in there into essentially sort of fostering that. But that's, you know, a new and a significant way for us to really understand how the message is coming across. What are the channels, what are the pieces of information that we have at our disposal to understand how the message is being read and reading it back to us. And all of this to say that really, when it comes to media, there is no mass media anymore. The fan really is the media. There is far more creation going on by fans and your audiences than what we are creating, what the artist is creating. The artist has to create, and we have to put sort of the seeds in there, but literally sort of the growth comes from the audience themselves. They are the ones, they are the creative division. They, you know, essentially create and spread. And in many cases, they are, you know, impersonating and living whatever it is that the persona that the artist is emulating. So this is really sort of the big shift. The media, what is the media that we are leveraging? And that is the fan. So if you have got the first step in really sort of activating anything these days that is creative and we're trying to communicate is, who are my advocates? How do I get to them? Can I speak to them directly? And if I can, I should. I'm actually doing my summary now. Can I speak to them directly? And how do I leverage these subcultures essentially to amplify sort of the spaces and find new ones as well in which I can essentially permeate the narrative of the artist. So that's what I have for you. I hope that was helpful, and I don't have time for questions now, but if anyone would like to ask me anything, I'll hang around for a little bit and it'll be my pleasure. Thank you very much.